Recently, I had a conversation with somebody who was a contractor for Dropbox, meaning that they were getting paid from Dropbox every month to fulfill on services that Dropbox needed. And they were getting $20,000 a month, which is a lot for anybody, right? Any solo, freelancer, entrepreneur, anyone making 20 grand a month is doing all right. So I thought when I first started, I was like, awesome, keep that going as long as you can. And the more I thought about it, actually, the more I realized this actually sucks. And other people that I talked to who are contractors, it's actually awful. If you're not sure what a contractor is, it's basically you are providing services to a client for a temporary basis rather than full-time. Again, I'll get into more distinctions in a second, but this dude that I talked to is a lot like other freelancers I talk to that are what I consider suckered into contracting. Some might be a few months at a time. Some might be indefinite, like this Dropbox one where there was no like set end date for the contract. And if you're wondering, why is this suck? Why would I say somebody who's making 20 grand a month as a Dropbox contractor, a sucker? I wouldn't say him specifically, but contractors in general are getting suckered into becoming a contractor for clients. And it sucks because you essentially have no benefits, no pay time off, no stability, no real guarantee that you're going to have your job tomorrow. You still have a boss. You don't have a client in this case. You have a boss. Whereas freelancing, real freelancing should be your terms. It should be your processes, your systems that you're working through. You should have clients, not bosses, at least not a boss in the traditional sense. But this is not really what happens when you're a contractor, especially for bigger companies like Dropbox. At best, you're getting paid well, but then you're finding a new job every few months, which if you try to think it through like the job search process or the contractor search process, doing that every few months when every contract ends, how much that's going to kill momentum, take away focus from either what you're doing or what you're working on every few months, trying to find a new job essentially. That's at best. And then at worst is you have no idea when the contract's going to end. You build your life thinking that you're safe. It lulls you into this false sense of security, thinking you're going to get that 20K a month every month. And this guy that I'm talking about, he lived in a very expensive area, had a wife, they had a house. And so what happens when all of a sudden that next month, Dropbox decides to just cut off that contract? I don't know if anyone, myself included, as a freelancer who would turn down a $20,000 contract every month. That's idiotic to do that. However, when you build your life around this, that has a lot of negative things that can come with it, especially when that contract dries up and you don't have prospects for projects, clients, the next contract lined up. So this sort of like high paying $20,000 a month contract is the extreme outlier. It is not the norm. It is the exception. But some other people I talked to, there's a guy that was working at a post-production studio in the video space and did that full time for several years, left that and was on a contractor basis, getting paid the same exact hourly pay he's getting at his old job, except he had no benefits. They didn't have to pay payroll taxes. They were saving so much money, turning him into a contractor. And that, to me, is the real sucker's game. When you're getting paid the same, you have no benefits, no stability, no legal protection as a contractor versus an employee. You are on the hook for all taxes. That's another big thing. So in this episode, I want to dive into a better model for freelancers, especially those that are pulled by the song of the siren into potential peril. If I could just do that, as a few months of income, I'll figure out the freelancing thing later. So I want to talk through a model that's more stable, more reliable, and should definitely make you sleep better at night. And this is going to be highly relevant for you no matter what you're doing. If you are doing client work, you're the traditional freelancer, there's still going to be stuff in this episode that's going to be highly relevant to you and stuff you're going to want to hear. But especially if you are a contractor freelancer, you are working with one client at a time, typically, you're definitely going to want to watch this episode. If this is your first time listening to the show, hi, I'm Brian. This is the Six Figure Creative Podcast. This podcast is for you. If you are a creative freelancer, you offer freelance services, and you want to make more money without selling your soul, I cannot think of a worse way to sell your soul than to make no money as a freelancer, have that contract cut off, and then be forced to either settle for these low-paying gigs off Fiverr or whatever crap hits your inbox because you're waiting around, or you have to go get another day job because you couldn't make it work as a freelancer. That to me is the ultimate selling of your soul. So this episode, we're gonna talk about how you make money as a freelancer. What's the best model to do this in 2024 and beyond? So first we gotta make money, and then we can worry about when we're stable, how do we turn that into more of a passion focus? How do we find that blend between passion and finances versus just focusing on passion? The sign behind me, it takes more than passion. You just focus on passion. You don't make money. You give up, go get a day job. That's truly selling your soul. So again, we got to get money first, and then we can worry about how do we make more without selling our soul, or how do we get more of our soul back once we've made money as a freelancer. Either way, it's a spectrum. There's no black or white here. But let's talk about the stable freelancing model. If you listen to last week's episode, talked to over 800 freelancers in the last year or so. And the contractor world was something I was not at all familiar with because my background is in music production, typically working with more hobbyists or aspirational musicians. In no world have I ever thought about or considered or even been offered a contractor role with a bigger company. So that's just something that was never on my radar. But after talking with hundreds and hundreds of freelancers, this is something that's so common. I'd say 1 in 3 freelancers that I talk to, if not more, are doing contracting currently or has done contracting in the past. what I end up having to explain to people over and over and over again on conversations, one-on-one, and this is why I'm doing this episode, so I don't have to do this anymore. There is a better way than just contracting. And there's a few kind of like benchmarks or rules of thumb when it comes to freelancing that provides a better overall model to follow versus just picking up a big contract here, picking up a little contract here, getting a monthly contract there, getting brought on for this one project with a company or an agency over here. The first one is the 10% rule. The 10% rule is no one client, no one source of income as a freelancer should represent more than 10% of your income for the year. And it should not represent more than 10% of your time in a given year. Not a single client should represent more than 10% of income or 10% of time. And the reason is, as freelancers, what helps us sleep at night is diversification of income. When you have a day job, you have a single source of income. If that day job fires you, you lose that single source of income. You go to zero overnight. Now that's relatively rare if you're not performing correctly. They'll usually put you on a performance improvement plan of some sort. And then if you don't improve, maybe they'll let you go. There can be downsizing. Sometimes you have warnings there. It's generally less rare than as a contractor. They can just cut the contract anytime with no consequences because there's usually some legal protection to make sure that they're just not firing people for things that they shouldn't fire people for, right? But it's still one source of income. As a contractor, when you're working with one or just a few people a year, every one of those is a single source of income. And as soon as it cuts off, you're back down to zero. So why the rule of 10? If you have 10 different sources of income from 10 different clients or 10 different projects, 10 different independent sources, by the way, it could be one client giving you 10 different projects. It's actually just one source of income. So I mean, one specific client should never be more than 10% of your annual income, or you have what's called a whale, and whales will kill your business. So for stability, to be able to sleep well at night, we have 10 different sources of income at a minimum as a freelancer, that if we lose a client, our income drops no more than 10% at the most. And when that's the case, you're not as stressed. You're not trying to make sure that you keep that one client happy. You're not stressed when that one client decides not to re-up the contract this year. I actually had a friend who ran an agency, by the way, an agency with multiple employees, 10, 15 employees. Their biggest client, like 90% of the agency's income was from one big publicly traded company on a contract basis, and that re-upped every year. And they built that agency. And then as soon as COVID happened, that contract ended. And that agency essentially folded. They're still around to some extent, but I think it's just the two founders at this point. I don't know all the details there, but most of their income came from one source of income. And when that income source ended because of the pandemic, they were left scrambling. They had to let a lot of people go. It was not a good time. So whether it's a massive worldwide event like a pandemic, or just a local event like the person filed bankruptcy, or the client just decided that this project's not worth pursuing anymore, or they don't want to allocate budget to that, or they're done here and they don't need you anymore, whatever the reason, when you lose that one source of income that's more than 10% of your income, or maybe is 100% of your income, you're back to zero and you are scrambling and you are stressed and now you're eating into your savings and now you're just going to take whatever comes your way. That's a horrible place to live. So that's the 10% rule. No client takes up more than 10% of your time and no client represents more than 10% of your income. And so that means if your goal is 100 grand a year, every client should be 10 grand or less. Now, obviously we don't want to go too low. We don't want every client to be worth $100 because that's just a nightmare of admin and operations and project management. That's just awful. You become a drive-through window at McDonald's at that point. But there's a sweet spot in that 1 to 10K range for a client. And that obviously depends on how long it takes to fulfill. So that generally means you need to create some sort of productized service. In freelancing, there is the freelancer who just offers all things to all people. And those are the people who end up getting contract gigs because they have a diverse skill set. And the person who hires them can utilize them as a tool for their business instead of you using yourself as a tool for your business, because that client either has the project deal flow. A lot of agencies, by the way, we'll talk about this in a second. A lot of agencies have the deal flow, and so they can utilize you as a tool. But when you create a productized service that solves a specific problem or creates a specific outcome for a specific person, that's how you start to get those well-defined projects that are in that $1,000 to $10,000 range, 15, 20 grand. If you can do at least 10 of them a year, you can do 15, 20 grand. And you start to build out a diversified client base versus one source of income. So that's the first thing, the 10% rule. The second part of this model is projects that are stackable. Now, it could be you stack them on top of each other, meaning you can do multiple projects at the same time. So this can be the case in certain niches where a project might be ongoing for like a month, but it doesn't take up your full time every day, right? Like photography, you might do a shoot one day or a shoot one weekend, and you edit throughout the week. And so you might stack multiple projects on top of each other at the same time. That's one way. The other side is when it does take up your full entire being for a short amount of time, and you stack them one after another. That was my model back in the day. I was producing bands, and we would do a single, an EP, an album, and that would just essentially get blocked off on my calendar one after another with a day or two buffer between. And that allowed me to book my calendar up 3 to 6 months in advance so I could have predictability in my own income when I'm taking deposits and I have demand for my services and the projects are being placed on my calendar ahead of time. And those deposits are non-refundable. Those projects won't just evaporate out of nowhere. And if they do, I keep the deposit and I'll try to refill that date with someone else. And because I got the non-refundable 40 to 50% deposit, I can even offer discounts for last minute bookings to incentivize people to fill up dates on my calendar that otherwise would have been a big fat zero, or at least $0 more on top of what I've already gotten with a deposit. So that's the second part of this stable freelancing model. The first is the 10% rule. The second is their stackable projects. The third is you offer it at a flat rate. And this is something that trips up so many freelancers. They hate flat rates because the projects end up going on forever and that eats at what their profit is. And that's the most common scenario why no one wants to offer flat rates. And that's why when you offer flat rates, you need guardrails in place. And the reason we want flat rates in the first place is because when you create a productized service, where in my background, producing a song from start to finish, mixing a song from start to finish, wedding photography is a productized service, show up to the wedding, take the photos, process the photos, send it to the client, make them happy. Full service branding as a designer, that's a productized service. Things where it's a clear deliverable, there's clear milestones, there's clear set things that you're gonna do with every client, regardless of the project. When you offer a productized service like this, the more you do it, the more efficient you tend to become. You figure out better processes, you figure out things you can cut out that you don't need, you figure out how to hire a team and bring them on. You just get naturally faster at doing things as you do it, if you put your 10,000 hours in. And when you offer a flat day rate or an hourly rate and you get more efficient, who benefits from that efficiency? Who benefits from the systems and the processes and the team making things run more smoothly, getting things done faster? When you charge a flat day rate or an hourly rate, the client is getting all that benefit. Whereas if you charge a flat rate and you're getting $10,000 for a project and it's going to take you 100 hours to complete, you make $100 an hour, right? What happens if you bring on somebody who can save you 15 hours and you only have to pay them $15 an hour? Now, what happens if you've automated certain things and you bring that down another 5 hours? Now you're at 80 hours. You're netting about $9,700 because you have to pay the contractor, the person who delegated that $15 an hour task to. For $9,700, your hourly pay just shot up to $121 an hour. And the more efficient you become, the more of a team you build around you, the more you get to actually benefit from that saved time. The more efficient you get in a flat rate project, the more money you make as a freelancer, the more profit you make as a freelancer, and the more your income will start to skyrocket. That's why I was able to get my income as a music producer, producing metal bands in Nashville, Tennessee, country music capital of America. I was able to get my hourly income up to over $300 an hour because of flat rates. And in no universe am I charging a client $300 an hour on the clock. They would laugh me out of the door if I said it's going to be $300 an hour. So those are the three big parts of a stable freelancing model. 10% rule, if all your clients are 10% or less of your income and time, you can stack the projects on top of each other, either vertically or horizontally. And you can offer them at a flat rate where you can start to become more efficient and you get to benefit from the upside of that. Now you have a very stable model, which leads me to the point of why don't all freelancers do this? Why do freelancers take contract gigs? It's because when a big company wants talent and they don't want to hire a full-time employee because of the payroll taxes that it incurs, the benefits they have to pay out, unemployers insurance, all sorts of things they have to go through, they don't want to deal with that. When they can just bring a contractor on, they get to save all of that time, all of that money, all of that potential legal trouble they could get into if they know they're gonna have to let somebody go in just a few months for this temporary project. Sometimes the client will pay a premium, but not always. And it can be really tempting to say, well, for the next 3 months, I can get $5,000 a month. That's less than I want to make, but it's some stable income. I know it's going to suck up all my time, effort, energy. Probably not. You probably don't know that. You think you can actually still work on the side as a freelancer, but you don't realize they're going to be very demanding of your time because they're paying you a flat rate. It's essentially a $5,000 a month salary. And you're going to do a whole lot of work for your boss. You're going to have no benefits, no paid time off, and they can cut the cord at any point with no repercussions. That's the first reason people fall into this, is because they just get lulled into, I need the money, right? On the flip side, there's agencies. A lot of agencies want to sub out work. And this is the most common thing I see with freelancers. They want to sub out work to talent. So if I'm a big agency owner, I've got a team of 30 people, we've got more projects than we can handle, or there's some specialty or thing that we don't really handle well, and I still want to say yes to the client, then I'll go out, I'll find a freelancer, I'll hire them on a contract basis, and I'll sub out to the work, paying them about 15 to 30% of what I'm getting paid for that project. So if I'm making 10 grand for the project, you lowly freelancer, you're going to get 1,500 to 3 grand to do this for me. And the remaining balance is for my operation expenses as the agency, to pay the rest of my team, to pay my salary as the founder, owner, and then ultimately for profit left over at the end of the month or year or quarter, whatever you do as the business owner. And this is the crux of everything. For the agency, they have the deal flow. They have more work than they can handle. They're the ones getting the projects in the door. They're the ones getting their own clients. Lowly freelancer out there who doesn't understand how to bring in clients, doesn't understand deal flow, doesn't understand client acquisition, they get the little ping, the little ring in the door, the little ping in their inbox, the text, the phone call from the agency owner offering a short-term, a long-term, a mid-term project on a contract basis. Real hard to say no to that. I don't want to say no to money. And then 3 months later, the project's dried up. You haven't done anything for client acquisition. We're hoping and praying that one of those pings in your inbox is another agency or another contract. And that's why this is for suckers. The only way to get out of this trap and to not be a sucker is to A, follow some semblance of that stable freelance model that I talked about a second ago, 10% rule, stackable projects, flat rate pricing, have some sort of thing like that, while also having your own deal flow. So how do you get your own deal flow? I want to talk about this because I don't want to just leave you high and dry here. I will say, well, next week, we're going to start the client acquisition series again. If you missed it last time, this is going to be super helpful for you. If you happen to catch it last time, well, this time, listen again because you need to be reminded about things more than you need to be taught about things. So a lot of things you already know, but you just don't do, or you forgot about, or you heard one time, started to implement it and fell off. Who knows? There's a million things. Go through it again. But the big thing that I want to talk about right now is when it comes to getting your own deal flow as a freelancer, you have to understand where you belong as a freelancer. Where do you belong in the universe? This is something that many people I talk to have no idea how they fit in. And so I want to talk about B2B freelancers first. B2B freelancing is business to business. As a freelancer, you are a business, whether you like it or not. And freelancers who work with other businesses tend to make more money. And the reason they tend to make more money is because in freelancing, the closer your service is to the money, the more you will get paid. If you're a copywriter who can write great, compelling ads for social media advertising, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, you're able to write compelling ads that get conversions, get customers for your clients. Maybe you work with e-commerce, maybe you work in software, SaaS, something like that. If you're able to write great copy that directly attributes to money, you will never have to worry about money again as a copywriter. I can promise you that. But what happens is you take your skill set and you apply it to something that's just so far from money that you just don't get much of it. That same copywriter might be just doing blogs instead. Blogs, while great, are not as directly attributable to income because blogs are for nurturing, for building trust, sometimes for SEO, and sometimes that SEO can be attributed back to money, but usually SEO content is different from trust building content. And so you're just going to get paid less if you're just creating fun content for a brand or educational content for a brand. It's not as valuable as a skill set as writing ads that directly bring in revenue. That's what I mean when I'm saying the closer you are to the money, the more you will get paid. When we're talking B2B, business to business, it can be a little easier to find things that are closer to the money. However, just about every damn freelancer I talk to doesn't understand where they fit in the freelance world. And here's what I mean. If you are working with businesses that are under $1 million a year, they're generally broke. And if they're not broke, they're at least just not investing heavily into the thing that you offer. In most cases, there are some rare exceptions, but in most cases, they're just not heavily investing into whatever service that you offer. If they're over 20 to 25 million, for lack of a better term, they're out of your league. Over 20 to 25 million dollars a year, the person who's making the decision is not the founder, it's not the CEO, it's not a partner in the business. It's almost always going to be some sort of department head. It might be the head of marketing, it might be a creative director, it might be whoever. And when it's a non-founder decision maker choosing who they're going to work with, they want what's called a safe bet. And you know why? It's because they value their jobs. They don't want to get fired. They want to make their boss happy. They don't have a high threshold for risk or else they would have their own business. And because of that, they're going to hire safe, nice agencies that are well established. And they're going to pay a premium for it because they have the money to. Because when they hire a big, safe, fancy agency who's worked with 30 other people just like you in their field and charge 3 times to 4 times more than any freelancer would, Mr. CEO, man, says, great job. I know they'll do a good job. I feel good about this choice. Pat them on the head. But they're not going to hire you, Mr. Freelancer, Miss Freelancer, solopreneur. Freelancers just don't have a good track record of being reliable, being on time, even if they're overall cheaper than an agency. But there's other things besides this. There's other reasons besides safety that a larger company would go with an agency versus a freelancer. One of those being really complex procurement processes. Now, if you don't know what that means, that's likely why you're not going to get these gigs. But when bigger companies are working with agencies or even maybe a freelancer or even contractors, there can be some legal things they need to look into. There might be some compliance things that they have to go through before they're actually going to decide. Also, there's going to be multiple decision makers as well. So when you're trying to navigate a really complex procurement process for a contractor or a vendor or whatever, most freelancers don't know how to navigate that world. There's also longer sales cycles. Bigger companies, slower sales cycles. That means that if you don't understand how to navigate an enterprise sales process and how long those can take, and how many decision makers you need to talk to, and you don't have the skill set, knowledge, or patience to navigate that entire thing, you're not going to get the gig because bigger companies make slower decisions. It can also be really difficult with payment terms because the larger companies typically want to do like a net 30, net 60, net 90 payment terms where you get paid way later, and that can crush you cash flow wise as a solo freelancer. Even agencies can struggle with cash flow, meaning you're paying out talent or performing work now that you're not getting paid for 30, 60, 90 days from now. And most people do not have the war chest, aka the funds, the dry powder, sitting aside to live off of in order to do 1 to 3 months of work or to wait 1 to 3 months to get paid. And then lastly, when it comes to these larger businesses, the reason you're not going to get these gigs is because they just have higher expectations that you cannot fulfill on. Solo freelancers just don't have the resources or any of the infrastructure required to fulfill on the level of work that larger companies need. So when you put all these things together, under 1 million broke, over 20, 25 million, sometimes 10 to 15 in some niches or industries, depending on how complex it is. These companies are out of your league. So what's our sweet spot? It's between 1 and 20, $25 million a year as far as B2B goes. And if you think that you're going to work with Gucci as a solo freelancer, that Gucci is going to directly hire you, you are sorely mistaken. We see this all the time. Who's your ideal client? Luxury fashion brands like Gucci, Armani. I don't know, is Armani still luxury? I don't know, but you see what I'm saying. And many freelancers have those sorts of brands on their portfolio, not because they've worked with them before, but because they were subbed out under the agency, getting paid pennies on every dollar for what the agency is getting paid. AKA they were suckered into contract work. Looks good on the portfolio. Looks great to have those associations as a brand. I'm not going to say don't do that occasionally if you're trying to build your portfolio up. But what I am saying is you're not building a stable, long-term, repeatable business that'll let you sleep at night if you do this. So that's where freelancers live in the B2B world, $1 to $20 million a year businesses. Now let's talk about B2C. That's business to consumer. If your client is not a for-profit business or even nonprofit, if it's not a business, you're probably working business to consumer or business to customer, whatever you want to call it. When you're working with consumers, it's a whole different ballgame. That's what my background was. I was technically B2B because bands, musicians are for-profit businesses, but they're not really. They are mostly aspirational. They're mostly passion-led. They're mostly going towards some pursuit that they're trying to get, either for status or for fame, sometimes for money, but usually for status, fame, or self-actualization. But there's a quote that I'll bring up here that ruffles some feathers. It is, I think it was Alex Mosey who said this: solve rich people problems, they pay better. Solve rich people problems, they pay better. That is true in B2B. That is also true in B2C. When you're working with general population, when you're working with families, when you're working with broke musicians, this still rings true. Broke clients will always be broke. Rich clients will always have money. And you can get your jimmies rustled by this, but it's also the way the world works. So if that's the truth, what does that mean to us as freelancers? It means this: sometimes your skill set is more valuable to certain populations than they are to others. Now, this is financially ideal if you can solve rich people problems, but it's not 100% required because my background, again, was not working with rich people. But I still want to talk through this. So just because people have disposable income, the exact service you offer is going to be more valuable to them than it will be valuable to somebody with no disposable income. If there's a rich family with kids versus a poor family with kids, my family growing up was poor. My family would never, ever spend $1,000, $2,000 or more dollars on a family photo session. Never in a million years. It's not that my parents didn't value their children. It's that they just didn't have the finances to invest into things like that. Things that are nice to have, not need to have, nice to have. What my family did do was spend $20, $50 on like a Walmart photography family photo session. You know, those, everyone has these on their wall or like some scan of it now. There's just like these really cheesy photos with your family. Those were like $20 to $50, maybe $100 at most. And that's what broke families had to do to get family photos back in the day, especially. Now, when you compare that to Anime Tonkin, who's been on the podcast before, she does family photo and she's working with more affluent families and she's charging them $1,000+ a year for her yearbook club. I don't know what her single solo sessions are for family photography, but she charges, I think it's $100 and something a month for the yearbook club, as she called it. Go back and listen to that episode. Go all the way back to episode 223, where she talks about shifting her clients from one-time projects to monthly recurring subscriptions. Fascinating episode. But the point remains, like, she works with more affluent families because they have the funds to invest in their kids. They have disposable income so that when a photographer comes their way, they're more willing to invest into their children photos, like family photos and things. Now, the problem comes if you have like a bleeding heart for people that are in need or something, right? And you want to do stuff because like maybe that's where your passion is, or that's where you want to focus, or you like working with broke musicians or whatever, like I did. In those cases, you have to make the decision. Can you make a profitable business work? Can you make it work or not? If you can, then by all means, go for it. That's what I did. If you can't, you have to just suck it up and work with clients who can pay you. And then you can volunteer your time to help those in need on your spare time. But you have to realize that business and charity are two separate things. You got to make money. You got to survive first. You got to make sure you are not broke and that your family is not broke. And then you can invest your time into things that you really care about, helping those who maybe don't have the means to do so, if that's something you're really passionate about. But now let's talk about one more thing here that's really important here, especially if you're working in the B2C world. And that is finding out where your service lives in the spectrum. It's not a black and white or gray. It's a spectrum of nice to have versus need to have. Some people, you're offering services that are just super need to have. And it'll be much easier for you to get clients because they have to have that service, right? Flip it all the way over to the other side. There's people that are offering just super nice to have things. It'd be nice to have that, but I don't need it. It's gonna be much harder to sell that, especially in times where finances are struggle, in downturn markets like the Great Recession. And I wanna give some examples here to know kind of where you fit, because you could take your same skill set and just move it from a nice to have to a need to have. And all of a sudden, now your same skill set's worth more. You could also take your skill set out of this B2C world into the B2B world, make sure it fits closer to earning money, and all of a sudden see your income skyrocket. So I'll give you some examples here. So couples photos. My wife and I, we did a couples photo shoot recently. Wonderful photographer from Nashville came over to our home. She took some amazing photos of us. I have not posted them on socials because I'm a horrible husband. Now that I'm thinking about it, I need to go do it. But we did it. It was nice to have. They're beautiful. They're on our photo frame now, our little aura photo frame that kind of rotates through some of our photos from travels and life and friends and family or whatever. And that's about all it'll do. It wasn't particularly expensive. I think she charges like $200. That was it. No upsells, no repeat, no referral ask. If she's listening to the show, which I know she's not, hit me up and I will help you make more money. Guaranteed. There's so many things that you're not doing that you could be doing, you should be doing. But that is a nice to have service. Definitely don't need it. We have disposable income, nice to have. We invested into that. Wonderful. She did a great job, by the way. Loved working with her. She just not running her business well. Now you can take the same photo skill and put it into a wedding. And now all of a sudden, wedding photos are much closer to that need to have on the spectrum. No one wants to have a wedding day with no photos. Now, you could just go with iPhone photos. I've seen weddings that just everyone has a place that they dump their iPhone photos from the wedding. Everyone's their phones out, whatever. That's the exception to the rule. Most people want professional, great looking photos for what will be the biggest day of their life, at least for your first wedding. I know people that are on their second or third marriages now. It gets to be a bigger deal every time, I believe. But I've only had one wedding and it was a massive, awesome event, biggest event in my life. Loved it. Had a great photographer there. We paid her a lot more money, thousands of dollars. It wasn't 10, 20 times more work than the couple's photos. I can promise you that. It wasn't 10, 20 times more work. It was maybe 2 to 3 times more work, but she got paid a lot more. And that's because she's closer to that spectrum of need to have. Now let's zoom out one more. What if you're taking that same photography skill and moved it up to B2B world? We know people that are doing product photography, where you are taking great photos of products and those photos make things more appealing. It's either restaurant photos, making food look amazing so people come out to your restaurant and buy more food, or product photography for e-commerce to make the products look more cool or look more action-packed or look more chill or cozy or whatever the vibe is. And because those photos represent the products better, they sell more products, AKA your service is closer to the money. You're not far from the money, you're close to the money. Those sorts of photographers tend to make more money, well over 6 figures a year. And then when you look back to my career as a music producer, where does that slide on the spectrum? Nice to have versus need to have. Actually, music production was pretty high on the need to have spectrum. If you are a musician and you have any aspirations to be serious as a career-oriented musician, which most people I worked with were serious about their careers, then you have to have music that's professionally produced. That sounds great. You have to have it. So that's very high on the spectrum for need to have. So even though I'm working with relatively broke musicians, like I remember working with a band, all the people in the band worked at Taco Bell for minimum wage. They could still afford my services because between the 5 of them, they could save up enough money that once a year they could come into the studio, they could record an EP or an album. They could pay me, I don't know how much I was charging at the time, but maybe 8 to 10 grand for an album, something like that. That means that each member needs to save about $166 a month to do that if they were doing an album every year. Now they probably weren't, they were probably doing like an EP, but the point remains, even at the brokest, they could still afford me because they were serious about it because they needed it and they wanted my specific sound. And if you're obviously a signed band or signed artist, which I work with many of those as well, many who are still crushing it to this day, those people have to have an album done. They literally have a budget from the label that they have to spend. So that's very high on the need to have list. So if you're listening to this episode and you feel yourself realizing or it's dawning on you that you are way out of the pocket of where you should be as a freelancer, maybe if you're in B2B, maybe you are trying to target people who are outside of that $1 to $20 million a year range. Maybe you don't have a productized service. Maybe you don't have flat rate pricing. Maybe you don't have the 10% rule followed where one client's not worth any more than 10% of your time or money. You don't have projects that are stackable. And maybe even you're not as close to the money as you should be as far as the services you could offer. Or if you're B2C, you're starting to dawn on you why your clients are all beating you down on price because you're nice to have, not need to have. Or you're working with broke clients instead of rich clients. As Alex Ramones says, solve rich people problems, they pay more. If that's starting to dawn on you that you've made this mistake, then I encourage you to do 2 things. Right now, I am in Europe on my mom's retirement trip. I've talked about this a few times. She's finally retiring after decades of service for the city of Decatur, Alabama, as the secretary for the mayor of Decatur. Wonderful woman, wonderful lady. We are on our trip right now. If all things went well, according to plan, hopefully, crossing fingers that is actually the case. And that means while I'm traveling, we're putting the client acquisition series up. And I want you to go listen to that. It'll go up at least 1 a week. We might do 2 a week for this, but go through that. In the meantime, if you feel like you need help figuring these things out, you're relying on contracts, as a contractor. You've been suckered into it. You know you need to get out and diversify your income streams to multiple clients. You don't know really where you fit in the overall market as far as your productized service. You don't know how to price it, package it. You don't know how to generate leads or get clients, get your own deal flow. These are things that we can help with. We can help you one-on-one. We can create a full marketing plan. We will pitch it to you. If you approve it, we'll work together. If you reject it, we part ways as friends, and we will help you implement every single thing on that roadmap that we create for you. That sounds at all appealing to have some one-on-one help from people who have done way more than you have. I can promise you. I don't say that out of ego. I say that out of truth. Me and my team have done this a lot. Go to sixfigurecreative.com/coaching, fill out the short application, and we will let you know if it's a good fit or not. Otherwise, keep checking along. We've got more than enough content here to help you out. We will be here when you need us. And I will hopefully be enjoying my time away. Hit me up on Instagram. Shoot me a DM if you have any questions. Or if you just want to chat travel, I'll talk to you. The link will be in the show notes at sixfigurecreative.com/316 for this episode. All links that I mentioned in this episode, including past episodes I mentioned, et cetera, et cetera. So that's it for this episode of the Six Figure Creative Podcast. I will see you after my trip.